Alright. This one would be as do she killed her 11 children and 4 husbands. Jeez.
Who can you trust to give you a refreshing cup of tea? If not an experienced housekeeper and nurse. In her days,
You see why I don't want a lot of kids?
or just help you relax at the end of the day. Mary was his go-to woman, but little did they know, when she treated them to her signature drink, her teapot was filled with more than just tea. Welcome back to Twisted Minds. My name is James, and today we'll be taking a deep dive into history and revisiting the story of the woman who has since been regarded as Britain's first serial killer, Mary Ann Cotton. Want to find out what special ingredients she put in her teapot? Well, keep watching to find out. The first of three children, Mary Ann was born on the 31st of October, 1832, to Margaret and Michael Robson. Young Mary was born at Low Morsley, County Durham, and was baptized only days later on the 11th of November at St. Mary's, West Raynton. Mary Ann had become a big sister at the age of 2 when her younger sister Margaret was born in 1834. Sadly, Margaret only lived a few months, and Mary Ann was once again the only child in the household. She was eventually provided with some company in the form of baby Robert, who joined the family in 1835. When Mary Ann was 8 years old, the Robson family moved to the village of Merton, still in County Durham, most likely for her father's work as a coal mine sinker. Soon after the family moved, they had to mourn the tragic loss of yet another of their own. In February 1842, while at work at the Merton coal mine, Michael Robson fell 150 feet to his death down a mine shaft. The then 9-year-old Mary Ann and her 7-year-old brother had already lived a hard life, with their family struggling to make ends meet. Now, with their strict father gone and the grief of the loss, the children and their mother were soon to be evicted from the home they had been provided by their father's employer. In 1843, the now widowed Margaret remarried a man named George Stott, who was also a miner. However, not much is known about this period in Mary Ann's life. What we do know is that Mary's early days were tragic, to say the least. When Mary Ann was 16 years old, she left home to work as a nurse in the home of Edward Potter, who was a manager at Merton Coal Mine and lived in the nearby village of South Hetton. In the space of 3 years of working for Edward, all his children were sent to boarding school in Darlington, and a now 19-year-old Mary Ann returned to her stepfather's home to train as a dressmaker. Just about a year after moving back to her stepfather's house, Mary Ann decided to finally start a life of her own, especially having dealt with a lot of financial struggles growing up. In 1852, the now 20-year-old Mary Ann got married to William Mowbray, who was a coal mine laborer. The two got married at the Newcastle upon Tyne Registry Office and soon moved to southwest England. Some 20 years later, reports surfaced of about 4 or 5 of the Mowbray children dying very young when the couple lived away from County Durham, with none of their births or deaths being registered. The first registered child of Mary Ann and William was Margaret Jane, who was born at St. Germans in 1856. William and Mary Ann eventually moved back to northwest England. William worked as a fireman aboard a steam vessel sailing out of Sunderland, and then as a coal mine foreman. The couple welcomed another daughter, Isabella, in 1858, and Margaret Jane died in 1860, just 2 years later. In 1861, they welcomed another daughter who was also named Margaret Jane, and then a son, John Robert William, in 1863. Sadly, their son died the next year from gastric fever. William, Mary Ann's husband, also died of an intestinal disorder in January 1865. At the time of their death, the lives of William and the children were insured by the British and Prudential Insurance Office, and the widowed Mary Ann received a payment of £35, which is equivalent to around £3,500 today on her husband's death, and £2, 5 shillings for Robert Williams. Not long after her husband William died, Mary Ann moved to Seaham Harbour, County Durham, where she met and began a romantic relationship with Joseph Nattrass. However, seeing how the two never tied the knot, it is safe to assume that things didn't work out between them. During this time, her now 3.5-year-old daughter, the second Margaret Jane, died of typhus fever, leaving Mary Ann with Isabella as her only surviving child out of about 9 children that she had allegedly birthed. Eventually, Mary Ann returned to Sunderland and took up employment at the Sunderland Infirmary, House of Recovery for the Cure of Contagious Fever, Dispensary and Humane Society. After securing a job, Mary Ann sent Isabella to live with her mother to allow her to concentrate on her work and possibly find a new husband. One of Mary Ann's patients at the infirmary was George Ward, an engineer. The two began a relationship in the course of her caring for him, and they got married on the 28th of August, 1865, at St. Peter's Church. George continued to battle paralysis and intestinal problems and died on the 20th of October, 1866. The recorded cause of his death was typhoid and English cholera. While his doctor affirmed that he had been ill, he also expressed surprise at how suddenly he had died. For the second time, Mary Ann received an insurance payment in respect of her husband's death. In November 1866, a month after George died, James Robinson hired Mary Ann as a housekeeper. James was a shipwright in Sunderland and a widower as his wife Hannah had recently died. A month into Mary Ann's employment, James's baby, John, died of gastric fever, and James turned to Mary Ann for comfort, resulting in her getting pregnant. Soon after, Mary Ann's mother became sick with hepatitis, so Mary Ann immediately went back to help her. Her mother soon began to recover, but she also began to complain of stomach aches. The 54-year-old eventually died in the spring of 1867, just 9 days after the now 34-year-old Mary Ann had arrived. Now with her grandmother dead and no one to take care of her, Isabella Mowbray, Mary Ann's daughter, returned with her to the Robinson household, where she soon developed severe stomach pains and eventually passed away. The same fate befell 2 of James Robinson's children, Elizabeth and James, and all 3 children were buried between late April and early May of 1866, with Mary Ann receiving a life insurance payment of about £5 for Isabella. Making the relationship official, James married Mary Ann at St. Michael's Church.
Oh, baby. Come here, baby. Buddy, be nice. Puffers.
She had accrued debt of £60
Come here.
and had stolen more than £50 that she was supposed to pay.
Puffers.
Forced his older children to sell some household valuables. These revelations caused him to throw her out of the house and
Come here, baby.
As you may be wondering, Frederick was the last of Mary Ann's husbands, as she died very discerning. Now living on the street after James had thrown her out, Mary Ann was desperate, and this explains why her joy knew no bounds when her friend Margaret Cotton came with some good news. Margaret introduced Mary Ann to her brother Frederick. Frederick was a pitman living in Walbach, Northumberland, and had recently
This is why I don't want a lot. I'm sorry.
1870 at St. Andrews, Newcastle upon Tyne. The couple welcomed their son, Robert, in early 1871. Mary Ann soon learned that her former lover, Joseph Nattrass, lived 48 kilometers away and was no longer married. So she rekindled her romance with him and then persuaded Frederick to move their family closer to Joseph to sustain the rekindled romance. Before you raise an eyebrow, you should know that it is unclear whether or not Frederick knew about the romance between Joseph and Mary Ann. Whatever the case, Frederick died of supposed gastric fever in December of 1871. And if you have not already guessed it, his life and those of his sons had been insured. Now, with Frederick out of the way, Joseph Nattrass began living with Mary Ann, allowing the two to advance their relationship. Mary Ann soon gained employment as a nurse for an excise officer who had been infected with smallpox. Although we can't be sure, it is most likely that the officer was named Richard Quick Manning. This patient of Mary Ann soon turned into her lover, and she was expecting a 13th child in no time. Frederick Jr. died in March 1872, and Mary Ann's infant son
I
Robert
guess
soon after,
that's how they did it back then, I guess.
surviving cotton child. Shortly after, Joseph Nattrass died of gastric fever soon after he had altered his will, now with Mary Ann as the primary beneficiary. Suspicion finally started rising when, in a conversation, Mary Ann revealed to a parish official, Riley, that her 7-year-old stepson, Charles Cotton, stood in the way of her marriage to Quick Manning, and an opportunity that she had been given to a nurse, a woman who was ill. She asked Riley, who at the time was West Auckland's assistant coroner, if the boy could be sent to a workhouse, but she stated that she would soon be rid of him, saying, "He'll go like the rest of the Cottons." 5 days after this, Mary Ann told Riley that Charles had died, causing him to be more suspicious. He went to the local police and also managed to convince the doctor not to issue a death certificate until the child's death was investigated. Meanwhile, Mary Ann's first outing after her stepson's death was to the insurance office, where she learned that no payment would be made until she could present a death certificate. The police investigation concluded, stating that Charles had died of natural causes, that Mary Ann claimed she had used arrowroot to help relieve the boy, and that Riley had only accused her because she had refused his advances toward her. However, the print media soon got hold of the story. They discovered that Mary Ann had lived in various parts of northern England and had lost 3 husbands, 2 lovers, a friend, her mother, and 11 children, all related to stomach ailments. These rumors soon gave rise to widespread suspicion. Dr. William Byers Kilburn, who had treated Charles while he was ill, began investigations of his own. He tested the samples he had kept and found that they contained arsenic. That's right, arsenic was Mary Ann's secret ingredient. The doctors reported his findings to the police. Mary Ann was subsequently arrested, and the police arranged an exhumation of Charles's body, as well as those of Nattrass and the 2 Cotton children who had died just months before. Samples collected from their corpses all contained arsenic. Mary Ann's trial was delayed until she gave birth to her child, Edith Quick Manning Cotton, on the 10th of January, 1873. The trial began on the 5th of March, 1873. The defense argued that Charles had died by inhaling arsenic, which was used as a dye in the green wallpaper at the Cotton home. The defense also argued that the chemist may have accidentally used arsenic powder instead of bismuth powder in preparing medicine for the boy. However, the child would have had to inhale a mound of arsenic powder to result in his death. The other arsenic-induced deaths revealed by investigations on corpses were also invaluable pieces of evidence. The jury deliberated the case for 90 minutes before returning with a guilty verdict. After the verdict was announced, various accounts of the events that followed were released. One of these was an excerpt that read, "After conviction, the wretched woman exhibited strong emotion, but this gave place in a few hours to her habitual cold, reserved demeanor, and while she harbors a strong conviction that the royal clemency will be extended toward her, she staunchly asserts her innocence of the crime that she has been convicted of." Many think that Mary Ann strongly believed that she would receive royal clemency because she was nursing a child, but that was not the case. Several appeals were made to the Home Secretary on her behalf, but all returned with no positive result. Mary Ann Cotton was hanged at the Durham County Jail on the 24th of March, 1873, aged 40. The execution was carried out by William Calcraft, who has been described as a clumsy executioner. She died from strangulation instead of the usual neck breaking, as the rope was rigged too short. The executioner had to press down on her shoulders to strangle her, and she died within 3 minutes. Margaret Edith Quick Manning Cotton and George Robinson were the only of Mary Ann's 14 children to outlive her, and the later only survived because of his father's alertness. James Robinson was also the only man to survive a romantic relationship with her, out of the 6 men that she had been involved with throughout her entire, rather eventful life. Thanks for tuning in to Twisted Minds. That was the case of Mary Ann Cotton. And why don't you go ahead and click on one of the 2 videos on your screen?
Alright, I will see you in my 6th video, so I see you then.